Hello my friends, and welcome back to Doc's Storyline English. Today we have a very special story. It is the story of one of the most powerful and intelligent women who ever lived. Her name was Cleopatra. She was the last queen of ancient Egypt. She ruled one of the greatest civilizations in history. She spoke 9 languages. She was loved by 2 of the most powerful men in the Roman world. Her story is incredible. Let us begin. Cleopatra was born in 69 BC. She was born in the city of Alexandria, in Egypt. Alexandria was one of the greatest cities in the ancient world. It was founded by Alexander the Great more than 200 years before Cleopatra was born. The city had the most famous library in the world, the Library of Alexandria. It had one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Lighthouse of Alexandria. It was a city of learning and power. Cleopatra's father was the Pharaoh of Egypt. His name was Ptolemy XII. He was called Ptolemy the flute player because he loved music. Cleopatra's mother is not mentioned in most ancient records. We do not know who she was exactly. Cleopatra had brothers and sisters. 2 of her brothers were also named Ptolemy. She had 2 sisters named Berenice and Arsinoe. The royal family was very powerful but also very dangerous. The royal family that Cleopatra was born into was called the Ptolemaic dynasty. This family had ruled Egypt for almost 300 years. But they were not originally Egyptian. They came from Greece. They were the descendants of one of Alexander the Great's generals, a man named Ptolemy. Because of this, the royal family spoke Greek, not Egyptian. Most of them never bothered to learn the Egyptian language. Cleopatra was different from all her ancestors. She was extremely intelligent and she worked very hard to learn languages. She learned to speak Egyptian, the first ruler of her dynasty in almost 300 years to do so. She also spoke Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Aramaic, Ethiopian, Parthian, Median, and Arabic. In total, she spoke 9 languages. She believed a ruler must speak to her people in their own language. Cleopatra was also educated in mathematics, philosophy, and astronomy. She studied at the famous Library of Alexandria. The library contained over 700,000 scrolls, the greatest collection of knowledge in the ancient world. Being educated there was the equivalent of going to the best university in the world. Cleopatra absorbed everything. She was not just beautiful, she was one of the most learned people of her time. When Cleopatra was 14 years old, her older sister Berenice did something very dangerous. She seized power from their father Ptolemy XII and made herself queen. Ptolemy fled to Rome. He begged the Romans for help. The Romans helped him return to power. When he came back, he executed his daughter Berenice. Cleopatra watched all of this. She learned a very important lesson. Power in the royal family was always about survival. When Cleopatra was 18 years old, her father Ptolemy XII died. He left the kingdom to Cleopatra and to her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. Ptolemy XIII was only 10 years old. The tradition in Egypt was that a woman had to rule alongside a man, so Cleopatra became co-ruler with her brother. She was also expected to marry her brother. This was a royal tradition in ancient Egypt. But Cleopatra had no intention of sharing real power with anyone. Cleopatra ruled Egypt effectively. She made important decisions. She managed the economy. She dealt with problems of drought and food shortages. She spoke to the Egyptian people in their own language, and the people loved her for this. But her brother's advisors, powerful men named Pothinus, Achilles, and Theodotus, did not want Cleopatra to have power. They worked secretly to remove her from the throne. In 48 BC, when Cleopatra was 21 years old, her brother's advisors moved against her. They raised an army. They forced Cleopatra to flee Egypt. She went into exile in the desert regions on the border between Egypt and Syria. She had no palace. She had no army of her own. She was in the desert with a small group of loyal followers. But she did not give up. She was already planning how to return to power. At the same time, something enormous was happening in the Roman world. 2 of the most powerful men in Rome were fighting a civil war. One was Julius Caesar. The other was a general named Pompey. Caesar defeated Pompey in a great battle in Greece. Pompey fled to Egypt. When Pompey arrived in Egypt, Cleopatra's brother Ptolemy XIII made a terrible decision. He had Pompey killed and cut off his head. Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria shortly after Pompey. When he was shown Pompey's head, Caesar was shocked and disgusted. Caesar had been Pompey's enemy, but Pompey had once been his friend. Killing him was not honorable. Caesar was now in Alexandria with his soldiers. He was the most powerful man in the Roman world. He announced that he would solve the conflict between Ptolemy and Cleopatra. Cleopatra saw an opportunity. Cleopatra needed to meet Caesar, but she was in exile. Her brother's soldiers controlled Alexandria. If she tried to enter the city, she would be captured and killed. She needed a plan. She had a trusted friend and servant named Apollodorus. He was a Sicilian merchant. Together, they created one of the most famous plans in history. Apollodorus wrapped Cleopatra tightly inside a large carpet. He tied the carpet shut, and then he carried her to Caesar. When the carpet was unrolled in Caesar's chamber, Cleopatra stepped out. Caesar was stunned. He had expected a frightened girl. Instead, he found a 21-year-old woman of enormous intelligence, charm, and confidence. She spoke to him in perfect Latin. She explained her situation. She explained her right to rule Egypt. She was brilliant and persuasive. Caesar was completely captivated. By morning, they were allies. Very soon, they became much more than allies. Caesar decided to support Cleopatra's claim to the throne. This made her brother Ptolemy XIII very angry. His advisors were furious. A battle broke out in Alexandria itself. Caesar's soldiers and Cleopatra's supporters fought against Ptolemy's army in the streets of the city. During this battle, fire spread to the docks and to part of the famous library of Alexandria. Some of the greatest books in the world were burned. It was a terrible loss. Eventually, Ptolemy XIII was defeated. He drowned in the Nile River while trying to flee. Cleopatra was now the queen of Egypt. But according to Egyptian tradition, she still needed a male ruler. She made her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, who was only 11 years old, her ruler. He was completely under her control. Cleopatra was now the real ruler of Egypt. She was 22 years old. Caesar stayed in Egypt for some time. He and Cleopatra traveled together up the Nile River on a great royal barge. It was one of the most famous journeys in ancient history. The barge was enormous and beautiful, decorated with gold and flowers. They sailed past the temples of ancient Egypt. Caesar was amazed by Egypt's ancient civilization. Cleopatra showed him the wonders of her kingdom. She was showing him that Egypt was worth keeping. In 47 BC, Cleopatra gave birth to a son. She named him Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar. She claimed that Julius Caesar was the father. Caesar never publicly acknowledged the child as his, but he allowed Cleopatra to name the boy after him. This was very important for Cleopatra. Having Caesar's son meant she was connected to the most powerful man in the world. It gave her power and protection. In 46 BC, Julius Caesar invited Cleopatra to come to Rome. She came with her young son Caesarion and with her brother husband Ptolemy XIV. She lived in Caesar's villa outside Rome. This caused great scandal in Rome. Romans did not like foreigners. They especially did not like the idea of Caesar being so close to a foreign queen. Roman politicians were angry. They feared that Caesar wanted to make himself a king. While Cleopatra was in Rome, a terrible event happened. On March 15, 44 BC, a date known as the Ides of March, Julius Caesar was assassinated. A group of Roman senators stabbed him 23 times in the Senate. Cleopatra was at Caesar's villa outside the city when she heard the news. She was devastated. The most powerful man in the world, her protector and ally and possibly the father of a child, was dead. After Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra was in danger in Rome. The men who killed Caesar were powerful. Rome was in chaos. Cleopatra could no longer stay safely. She took her son and left Rome immediately. She sailed back to Egypt. When she arrived in Egypt, her brother husband Ptolemy XIV died, possibly poisoned by Cleopatra's order, though we cannot be certain. She made her son Caesarion her new ruler. She was fighting for survival. Back in Egypt, Cleopatra ruled alone and effectively. She was a very capable administrator. She managed the economy carefully. She ensured that the Nile floods, which were essential for growing food, were properly managed. She built temples. She honored the Egyptian gods. The Egyptian people considered her a goddess, a living version of the goddess Isis. She encouraged this belief. She often dressed as Isis in public ceremonies. After Caesar's death, Rome was again divided by civil war. Three men fought for power. Caesar's adopted son Octavian, a powerful general named Mark Antony, and a politician named Lepidus. They divided the Roman world between them. Mark Antony took control of the eastern part of the empire, including Egypt. In 41 BC, Antony sent a message to Cleopatra. He summoned her to meet him in the city of Tarsus, in what is now Turkey. Cleopatra received Antony's summons. She did not go immediately and humbly like a servant. She made Antony wait. And when she finally came, she arrived in a way that no one would ever forget. She sailed up the river to Tarsus on an enormous golden barge. The sails were purple silk. The oars were silver. She lay under a canopy of gold cloth, dressed as the goddess Aphrodite, surrounded by beautiful servants dressed as sea nymphs. Antony was waiting for her on the dock. The crowd left him to rush to the river to see her arrive. Mark Antony was immediately fascinated by Cleopatra. He was a powerful Roman general, strong and brave and ambitious. But Cleopatra's intelligence and charm and political skill were extraordinary. They dined together that night on her barge. Cleopatra organized a spectacular banquet. The food was extraordinary. The entertainment was extraordinary. Everything was calculated to impress. By the end of the evening, Mark Antony was completely under her spell. Mark Antony and Cleopatra began a powerful relationship. He came to Alexandria. He spent the winter of 41 BC in Egypt with Cleopatra. He relaxed. He feasted. He enjoyed the luxury of the Egyptian court. He and Cleopatra organized a group of friends called the Inimitable Livers, people who lived life to the absolute fullest every single day. They competed to see who could organize the most lavish and entertaining banquet. But duty called Antony back to Rome. He had political and military problems. He had a wife in Rome, a Roman woman named Fulvia. When he returned to Rome, he was forced to marry the sister of Octavian, a woman named Octavia, as part of a political agreement. Cleopatra was alone in Egypt again. In 40 BC, she gave birth to twins, a boy she named Alexander Helios and a girl she named Cleopatra Selene. They were Mark Antony's children. For several years, Antony and Cleopatra were apart. Antony was busy with military campaigns in the east. He fought in Parthia, a powerful empire in what is now Iran. His campaign was a disaster. He lost many soldiers. He needed help. He needed money. He needed soldiers. Egypt was the richest country in the eastern Mediterranean. He went back to Cleopatra in 37 BC. She gave him everything he needed. In return, he gave her more territory. In 34 BC, Antony held a grand ceremony in Alexandria that shocked Rome. It was called the Donations of Alexandria. He sat on a golden throne. Cleopatra sat beside him on another golden throne. He declared Cleopatra the Queen of Kings. He gave enormous territories to her and to their children. He gave kingdoms to his children with Cleopatra as if he were giving away pieces of the Roman Empire. Rome was furious. Octavian used this against him. Octavian, Caesar's heir in Rome, used the Donations of Alexandria as a weapon. He told the Roman people that Antony had abandoned Rome. He said Antony was controlled by a foreign queen. He said Antony was giving away Roman territory to an Egyptian woman and her illegitimate children. He read Antony's will in public, which said Antony wanted to be buried in Alexandria, not Rome. Romans were outraged. War became inevitable. In 31 BC, the decisive battle was fought. It was not fought on land, it was fought at sea. The battle took place off the coast of Greece, near a place called Actium. Octavian's navy, commanded by a brilliant admiral named Agrippa, faced the combined fleet of Antony and Cleopatra. The battle did not go well for Antony and Cleopatra. During the fighting, Cleopatra's 60 ships suddenly turned and sailed away. Antony saw her leave and followed her. The battle was lost. Why did Cleopatra leave the Battle of Actium? Historians have debated this for 2,000 years. Some say she panicked. Some say she made a calculated decision to save her fleet and preserve Egypt. Some say she and Antony had already decided to retreat to Egypt and fight from there. Whatever the reason, their leaving decided the battle. Octavian won completely. Antony and Cleopatra had lost almost everything. Antony and Cleopatra returned to Egypt. They knew Octavian would follow. Cleopatra began preparing. She sent her treasure and her son Caesarion south, up the Nile, for safety. She explored options. Perhaps she could negotiate with Octavian. Perhaps she could find another ally. Perhaps she could escape to another country. She was the greatest strategic mind of her time. But for the first time in her life, she was running out of options. In 30 BC, Octavian's army arrived in Egypt. Antony's soldiers began surrendering to Octavian without fighting. Antony felt betrayed and defeated. A false report reached him. Someone told him that Cleopatra had already died. When Antony heard this, he was devastated. He decided he did not want to live without her. He took his sword and stabbed himself in the stomach. But he did not die immediately. His servants carried him to Cleopatra. Cleopatra was in her mausoleum, a large stone building she had built as a tomb. When Antony was brought to her, she was still alive. She lowered a rope and hauled him up through the window. She held him as he died. Ancient historians say she wept and called him her lord and her husband. He died in her arms. Cleopatra was now completely alone. Octavian's soldiers surrounded the building. Her last protector was gone. Octavian's soldiers broke into the mausoleum. They took Cleopatra prisoner. Octavian came to meet her. He was cold and controlled. He told her she would be taken to Rome as a prisoner. Cleopatra understood exactly what this meant. She would be displayed in chains in a Roman triumph, a public parade where Rome celebrated its military victories. She would be humiliated before hundreds of thousands of Roman citizens. Then she would probably be executed. Cleopatra was kept under guard in her palace. She was still queen, technically, but her freedom was gone. She had one last act of power available to her. She would decide how her own story ended. She refused to allow Octavian to parade her through Rome. She had been the most powerful woman in the world. She had ruled one of the greatest civilizations in history. She would not end her life as a prisoner displayed in chains. On August 12, 30 BC, Cleopatra prepared herself carefully. She bathed. She put on her finest royal robes. She put on all her royal jewelry. She had a magnificent final meal prepared. She wrote a letter to Octavian asking to be buried beside Mark Antony. She sent the letter. Then she called for a basket of figs. Ancient sources say that inside the basket, hidden under the figs, was an asp, a small poisonous Egyptian snake. When Octavian's soldiers came to check on her, they found Cleopatra dead on her golden bed. She was dressed in full royal regalia. She was 39 years old. One of her servants, Charmian, was also dying. She was adjusting Cleopatra's crown as she died. When a soldier asked Charmian if this was fitting, she replied, "It is entirely fitting, and worthy of the descendant of so many kings." Those words are among the most beautiful in ancient history. After Cleopatra's death, Octavian ordered her son Caesarion, the son of Julius Caesar, to be killed. He was 17 years old. Octavian could not allow a rival claimant to power to live. Cleopatra had sent Caesarion away for safety, but he was captured and brought back. He was the last of the Ptolemaic dynasty. With his death, 300 years of Ptolemaic rule in Egypt ended forever. Egypt became a Roman province. Octavian brought Cleopatra's story to Rome, but not the woman herself. He had a golden statue of Cleopatra made and displayed it in his triumph parade. He wanted to show Rome that he had defeated the Queen of Egypt. But the Romans watching were not sure whether to cheer or to weep. Cleopatra was the enemy they had been told to hate, but she was also the most extraordinary woman the world had ever seen. What did Cleopatra really look like? This is one of the most debated questions in ancient history. Ancient coins show her with a strong profile, a large nose, a strong chin, and a powerful face. She was not conventionally beautiful in the way Hollywood movies show. Ancient writers said that it was her voice, her intelligence, and her charm that were irresistible. The poet Plutarch wrote that spending time with Cleopatra was an experience that no one could resist. Cleopatra spoke 9 languages. This was extraordinary. Today we know this is true because ancient Roman writers mentioned it specifically. She was the first Ptolemaic ruler to speak Egyptian. She also spoke Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Aramaic, Ethiopian, Parthian, Median, and Arabic. Speaking these languages was not just about communication, it was about power. A ruler who could speak directly to her subjects commanded their loyalty in a way that a translator never could. Cleopatra was not just a queen. She was also a scholar. She is credited with writing books on medicine, poisons, chemistry, and cosmetics. Ancient sources mention books written by her. One ancient document mentions a book about hairdressing and beauty products that was attributed to Cleopatra. She was a serious intellectual in an age when most women, even royal women, were not expected to be scholars. Cleopatra's relationship with Julius Caesar changed the world. Caesar was so influenced by his time in Egypt and with Cleopatra that he brought Egyptian culture to Rome. He built a temple to the goddess Venus Genetrix in Rome and placed a gold statue of Cleopatra inside it. He also reformed the Roman calendar, creating the Julian calendar, using Egyptian astronomical knowledge that Cleopatra and her scholars showed him. This calendar is the foundation of our modern calendar. The story of Cleopatra and the asp is one of the most famous images in history. But was it true? Historians and scientists have questioned it for centuries. Some say the snake story was invented to make her death seem more dramatic. Some scientists say she was actually poisoned using a mixture of hemlock, opium, and wolfsbane, substances that would have been painless and fast. We will never know exactly how she died. But we know she chose her own ending. Cleopatra's legacy is enormous. She is one of the most written about and painted and filmed people in history. Shakespeare wrote a famous play about her. George Bernard Shaw wrote a play about her. Dozens of films have been made about her. She has been portrayed by Elizabeth Taylor in one of the most expensive films ever made. She appears in novels, operas, paintings, and sculptures. No woman in ancient history has inspired more art. Cleopatra was the last pharaoh of Egypt. After her death, Egypt never had its own ruler again for nearly 2,000 years, until modern times. She ruled during one of the most turbulent periods in history, when the greatest empire in the world was being born. She kept Egypt independent and powerful for 21 years through intelligence, diplomacy, and strategic alliances. Many people could not have done what she did for even 1 year. What can we learn from Cleopatra's story? She was born into extreme privilege but also into extreme danger. She faced enemies on every side from the moment she became queen. She used every tool available to her: her intelligence, her education, her languages, her charm, her political skills, her wealth. She fought for Egypt and for her children. She made mistakes. She made alliances with the wrong men. But she never stopped fighting. She never surrendered. Cleopatra died at 39 years old. She ruled Egypt for 21 years. She loved 2 of the most powerful men in history. She had 4 children. She spoke 9 languages. She wrote books. She kept Egypt free from Roman control for 2 decades when no one else could have done it. She chose her own end. She was the last queen of ancient Egypt. And 2,000 years later, the world still cannot stop talking about her. Thank you for listening to Doc Storyline English. If you like this story, please subscribe and share with your friends. We will see you next time.